lying paralyzed in a hospital bed. I heard my own parents tell the doctors to just let me die. A week later, they showed up with my sister for the inheritance. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot about the letter I left behind. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? My name is Zafira Hayes, and this is the story of how I rewrote my own ending. A year ago, I had a family, or more accurately, I was a featured player in the stage production of a family. The lighting was always perfect, the costumes were impeccable, and the lines were delivered with practiced ease. But the set was a cage, gilded and beautiful, and I spent 29 years thinking that the ache in my soul was just the price of admission. Now I know it was the sound of my own heart rattling the bars. It all started to unravel on a crisp Seattle evening in early June. The kind of night where the sky holds on to the light just a little too long, staining the clouds in shades of bruised purple and soft coral. Down below at the Four Seasons Hotel, the city's elite were gathered for the annual Children's Literacy Fund Gala, my mother's crowning achievement of the social season. From my position near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Elliott Bay, I watched the performance unfold. I watched my father, David Hayes, hold court by the towering floral arrangement. He was a man completely in his element, his tailored suit a second skin, his laugh a perfectly modulated tool of influence. He gestured with a flute of champagne drawing in a state senator and a tech billionaire with the effortless gravity of a celestial body. "And this," he said, his hand landing on my shoulder with a weight that was meant to feel like pride, but felt more like ownership. "This is my daughter Zafira Hayes, the brain behind Apex AI." The senator, a man with a forgettable face and an expensive watch, smiled politely. "Ah, yes, the logistics software, heard good things. She gets the brains from her mother, of course," David said with a wink, already turning his attention back to the more important man in the conversation. And just like that, I was dismissed, acknowledged, catalogued, and filed away. It was the story of my life. I was the high-performance engine they kept polished in the garage, but rarely took for a drive. My mother, Linda, was a different kind of force entirely. She didn't hold court. She was the atmosphere itself, drifting through the ballroom in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and weaponized charm. She stopped beside me, her eyes doing a swift, brutal inventory of my appearance. "Oh, Zafira, darling," she murmured, her voice a silken thread of disapproval. She adjusted a non-existent stray hair on my head. "That minimalist look is so wonderfully practical." She then turned to my sister, who was dazzling nearby. "Jess, sweetheart, turn around. Let Mrs. Vanderbilt see the detailing on your gown. Isn't she a vision?" Jessica, my younger sister, spun obediently in her shimmering peacock blue dress. She was a vision. Golden hair, a smile that could disarm armies, and an easy grace that I, with my dark hair, quiet intensity, and preference for clean architectural lines, had never been able to replicate. She was the sun. I was the shadow that proved the sun existed. "You look beautiful, Z," Jess said to me, and I knew she meant it. That was the tragedy of Jessica. Her kindness was genuine, but it was also profoundly naive. She had never known a day of conditional love in her life, so she couldn't recognize its subtle poison when she saw it administered to me. Later, I was cornered by one of my father's partners, a portly man named George, who smelled of cigars and self-importance. "So, Zafira," he started, leaning in conspiratorially, "your dad tells me you're quite the little computer whiz. Working on a new patent, are you? Don't let those patent trolls get you down. It's just a cost of doing business." I had been trying to explain to my father for weeks that we weren't dealing with a simple troll. This was a sophisticated corporate espionage attempt from a major competitor threatening the core of our new platform. I opened my mouth to correct him, to explain the nuance, but my father materialized beside us. "George, you old dog," David boomed, slapping him on the back. He glanced at me, his smile tight. "Z, I've been practicing law since before you were born. What George means is, don't worry your pretty head about it. It's being handled." He paused, then added the final condescending nail. "Let the big dogs handle the business, honey." The word honey landed like a slap. It was the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head, a word he never ever used with Jessica. The final cut came as it so often did from Jess. She found me by the dessert table, her eyes sparkling. "Oh my God, Z, I totally forgot to show you the pictures from Florence," she exclaimed, already swiping through her phone. Photos of her and my parents laughing in front of the Duomo, eating gelato on the Ponte Vecchio filled the screen. "It was amazing. Oh, wait," she said, her face clouding for a fraction of a second. "You couldn't come, right? Dad said you were swamped with that big launch. We missed you, though." I just nodded, the smile on my face feeling like a mask carved from ice. They hadn't forgotten to invite me. They had simply decided my presence wasn't required for the family portrait. I couldn't take it anymore. Without a word, I slipped through a side door, handed my valet ticket to a waiting attendant, and escaped into the cool, clean air of the Seattle night. My condo in South Lake Union was my rebellion, a Spartan space of concrete, glass, and steel, overlooking the glittering logical grid of the city. It was the antithesis of my parents' sprawling Bellevue mansion with its suffocating floral wallpaper and rooms full of furniture no one ever sat on. My phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat as I drove. Texts from the family. "Where did you go, Mom? Leaving without saying goodbye is rude, Zafira." Mom again. "Your father is upset. Call me. Now." The final command. I ignored them all. I walked into my silent apartment, kicked off my heels, and let the city lights wash over me. Then I picked up my phone, bypassed the angry red notification bubbles from my parents, and dialed the number that was my only true lifeline. She picked up on the second ring. Eleanor Vance. She answered, her voice raspy and warm like aged whiskey. "Hi, Grandma," I said, my own voice sounding thin even to me. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her assessing my tone, analyzing the spaces between my words. "The annual parade of peacocks is over, is it?" she asked dryly. A real laugh escaped me, the first one of the night. "You could say that. Let me guess," she continued, her voice laced with a familiar conspiratorial humor. "Did they remember you're allergic to shellfish this time, or did Linda serve shrimp again and just call it prawn, hoping you wouldn't notice?" "No shrimp this year," I admitted, a smile finally reaching my eyes. "Just the usual bite-sized condescension." "Ah, the house specialty," she sighed. "Well, are you free this weekend? The ferry misses you, and I have a new shipment of mystery novels that require your immediate professional opinion." "I'd love that," I said, the tension in my shoulders easing for the first time in hours. "I'll catch the first ferry on Saturday." "Excellent," she said warmly. "I'll have the tea on. Drive safe, my love." We hung up, and I stood there for a long time looking out at the water. My parents' house was a place where I was constantly measured and found wanting. The galas, the dinners, the holidays. They were all performances auditions for a role I could never quite land. But Orcas Island, Eleanor's house, it's the only place I thought my hand pressed against the cold glass of the window where I didn't have to earn my place at the table. The ferry ride from Anacortes to Orcas Island is a baptism. With every mile the boat puts between itself and the mainland, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest loosens. The sharp scent of salt water scours the lingering memory of my mother's perfume from my senses, and the cry of a gull overhead is a wilder, more honest sound than any I'd heard at the gala. This short journey across the water felt less like a trip and more like a crossing from their world to mine. Eleanor's home was tucked away in a cove on the west side of the island, a weathered cedar shake house that seemed to have grown out of the landscape itself. It was the antithesis of my parents' rigid manicured estate in Bellevue. Here, the garden was a chaotic masterpiece of English roses, wild lavender, and unruly herbs that spilled onto the stone pathway. There was no grand entrance, just a worn oak door and a wide welcoming porch with two mismatched rocking chairs. Eleanor was waiting for me there, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, her hands covered in dirt from her garden. She didn't hug me with the careful air-kiss precision of my mother. She pulled me into a real embrace that smelled of damp earth and Earl Grey tea. "You look tired, child," she said, her sharp blue eyes so different from my own missing nothing. "The city is eating you alive." "It tries its best," I replied, a genuine smile finally finding its footing. We spent the day in a comfortable rhythm that felt more like home than any place I had ever lived. We pulled weeds from her sprawling garden, her teaching me the difference between lemon balm and mint. "One soothes a troubled mind," she explained, crushing a leaf between her fingers, "and the other, well, the other just makes a damn good mojito." We walked the rocky beach at low tide, our pockets growing heavy with sea glass, smoothed by the patient, endless churn of the waves. It was during that walk that she looked at me, her head tilted. "So, did you ever get a straight answer from your father about that patent nonsense?" I was taken aback. I had mentioned it to her only once in a passing comment on the phone. "Not really," I said, shrugging. "He called it a cost of doing business and told me not to worry my pretty head." Eleanor snorted a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "David's head is so pretty, he's afraid to put a new thought in it for fear of messing up the decor. Did his jaw do that little tightening thing on the right side?" she asked. I stopped walking. "Yes," I said, stunned. "How did you know?" "My dear Zafira," she said, placing a hand on my arm, "I've been watching David Hayes operate for 35 years. He does that when his authority is questioned. You hold yourself so tightly in their world, my love, like you're bracing for an impact that never quite comes. Here," she said, her voice softening, "you can let your shoulders down." And I did. I felt a tension I hadn't even been aware of, release from my body, a physical manifestation of the peace this place and this woman offered me. Later that evening, as the sun bled into the sound, we sat on the porch in those mismatched chairs sipping tea. Eleanor brought out a heavy, leather-bound photo album. Most of the pictures were familiar: a gap-toothed Jess at her first ballet recital, my parents on their wedding day looking impossibly young, a few black-and-white photos of Eleanor herself as a young woman. She paused on one page, her finger tracing the edge of a faded photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe 20, from what looked like the late 90s. She had a wild mane of dark hair, a leather jacket, and a defiant smile on her face. But it was her eyes. They were my eyes. The same shape, the same shade of green, the same intensity. It was like looking at a version of myself from another life. "Some things," Eleanor said softly, almost to herself, "blood can't deny." The words hung in the still evening air. My heart gave a painful thud. "Who is she, Grandma?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor looked from the photo to my face, her own expression a complicated mix of love and sorrow. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before answering. "Her name was Catherine," she said gently, "and her story is a complicated one. It's not mine to tell, not entirely." She saw the question, the desperation in my eyes, and reached across to pat my hand. "There are truths that have a time and a place, my love, and the owners of those truths, they get to decide when—" But I started the protest dying on my lips. "I haven't left you in the dark, Zafira. Not really," she assured me. "I've put things aside for you, everything you need to know. I call it a legacy box. It's with Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, for when the time is right." The phrase hung there between us, full of unspoken weight. It was then emboldened by the strange intimacy of the moment that I asked the question that had haunted my entire existence. "Why are they like this?" I asked, looking out at the darkening water. "Mom and Dad, why does it always feel like I'm a project they completed and now they're not sure where to display me?" Eleanor was silent for a long time, the only sound the gentle rocking of her chair and the distant call of a loon. "David and Linda, they love the idea of family, Zafira," she began, her voice measured and careful. "The beautiful picture it paints. They fell in love with a photograph they wanted to hang on their wall. And you were the most beautiful, perfect addition to that photograph. A brilliant, quiet child who never caused a moment's trouble." She paused, taking another sip of tea. "But sometimes, a photograph isn't enough. It can't love you back. It can't challenge you or have needs that fall outside the gilded frame. And when the paint on that frame starts to chip when real life gets messy, they don't know how to fix it. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad, terrible understanding. They just hang a different picture over the spot. Jessica, I thought. My sister wasn't the favored child. She was the replacement picture. The thought was so clear, so painfully logical, it stole the air from my lungs. The drive back to the ferry the next day was different. The peace of the island was still with me, but it was now overlaid with a thin, sharp sheet of ice. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind, making a terrifying kind of sense of the million tiny cuts I had endured my whole life. I hugged her goodbye at the terminal, holding on a second longer than usual. "Be safe," she said, her hand cupping my cheek. But as the ferry pulled away from the dock, leaving her standing on the shore growing smaller and smaller, I was filled with a sense of impending doom I couldn't articulate. I was standing on the edge of a great precipice, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the truth was waiting for me in the chasm below. I just didn't know if the fall would kill me or finally teach me how to fly. The uneasy peace I found on Orcas Island lasted for exactly 3 days. By Wednesday, it was a distant memory drowned out by the relentless hum of servers and the fluorescent glare of my office. This was my other sanctuary, Apex AI, a world I had built from the ground up, a place governed by the clean, incorruptible logic of code. Here, there were no hidden meanings, no coded insults, just problems and solutions. And on that day, we had a problem. A ghost in the machine. A single elegant and utterly catastrophic bug in our new logistics platform, set to launch in less a week. It was a subtle corruption of data that cascaded through the system, untraceable and maddening. My team, a brilliant crew of coders fueled by cold pizza and a shared obsession, was running on fumes. "Go home, Z," Ben Carter said, leaning against the doorframe of my glass-walled office. My partner, my friend, my co-founder, and the only person who could call me Z and get away with it. His face was etched with exhaustion, his usual easy smile absent. "We're just staring at it now. Fresh eyes in the morning. It'll still be broken tomorrow, I promise." I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the waterfall of code on my triple monitor setup. "No," I said, my voice flat with concentration. "It's here, I can feel it. It's like a loose thread in a tapestry. If I pull on it just right, or the whole thing unravels," he finished for me, sighing. "Zafira, you've been here for 16 hours. The only thing that's going to unravel is you. We have a contingency plan. A delay isn't the end of the world." But it felt like it. This company, this code, it was the one thing in my life that was truly mine. It was the one place where my obsessive need for perfection was an asset, not a personality flaw. My parents saw it as a commendable hobby that produced a respectable income. Ben knew it was my armor. "Just another hour," I promised, not looking at him. I heard him sigh again, the sound of a battle lost. He knew that look. He knew that tone. A moment later, a fresh cup of coffee appeared on my desk. "Don't say I never gave you anything," he murmured, before disappearing back into the main workspace to send the rest of our weary team home. It was in that quiet, focused solitude an hour later that my phone lit up with a name that shattered my concentration, David Hayes. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. He wasn't one for persistence unless he wanted something. With a deep, steadying breath, I answered. "Hi, Dad," I said, my tone studiously neutral. "Zafira, working late, I hear." He began a tone of false jovial bonhomie that always set my teeth on edge. "Just wrapping up," I lied. "Good, good," he said, getting straight to the point. "Listen, I was just having lunch with Jonathan Pike from Sterling Financial, great guy. Anyway, I was telling him all about Apex and what you're doing with supply chain management, and he's very interested. Very interested indeed." I waited. The other shoe was about to drop. "The thing is," he continued, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial whisper, "they're a bit hesitant about the price point. I was thinking, to get them on board, we could offer them a significant discount. A family and friends rate, you could call it. It would be a great flagship client for you." I closed my eyes. It wasn't about a flagship client. It was about him looking good using my work as a social chit to impress his friends. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, "we don't have a friends and family rate. Our pricing is set. It reflects the value of the platform, and it's the same for everyone. It wouldn't be fair to our other clients." The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by an Arctic chill. "Fair Zafira, this is business. It's about relationships. Jonathan is an important contact for me, and for this family." "My business has to stand on its own," I replied firmly. "The answer is no. I can have Ben reach out to him to schedule a proper demo, but I can't offer a discount." Silence. A cold, heavy silence that I knew from 1,000 other phone calls, then his voice dripping with disappointment and a carefully crafted sense of injury. "Fine," he said, the word clipped and sharp. "Do what you think is best." He paused, letting the silence stretch for effect before delivering the killing blow. "I just thought family meant something." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the hypocrisy of his words burning like acid. Family meant something when he needed a favor. It meant something when he was posing for a photo at a charity gala, but it didn't mean anything when I tried to explain the complexities of my work, or when I just needed a father. It took me another 90 minutes, but I found it. The bug. A single misplaced semicolon in a line of code 1,000 pages deep, the digital equivalent of a typo. The relief was so profound, so absolute, it left me dizzy. I sent a triumphant one-word email to Ben Doan and finally packed up to go home. By the time I stepped outside, the city was shrouded in a classic Seattle downpour. The earlier drizzle had given way to a relentless driving rain that turned the streetlights into blurry impressionistic smears. The streets were slick and black, reflecting the neon signs in distorted, shimmering pools. The drive home across the I-90 bridge was hypnotic. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the windshield wipers, the low hum of the tires on the wet pavement, the exhaustion settling deep into my bones. My mind was a strange cocktail of elation from solving the bug and the lingering bitterness from my father's call. I thought of Eleanor on her island of the photo, in her album of the warmth in her voice. The car felt like a small, safe capsule hurtling through the dark, wet night. I took the Mercer Island exit, the route so familiar I could have driven it with my eyes closed. I was only 15 minutes from home. At the intersection of North Mercer Way and 77th, the light was green. I eased my foot off the brake, my mind already on my bed, on the blessed relief of sleep. And then, from the corner of my eye, a light. An impossible brightness growing at an impossible speed where there should have been only darkness. There was no time to think, no time to react. There was only the primal blood-freezing shriek of tires failing to find purchase on wet asphalt, the explosive deafening roar of metal tearing into metal, and a universe of shattering glass. The world ceased to be up or down. It was a violent, chaotic tumble, the force of the impact throwing me against my restraints with bone-breaking force. My head snapped sideways, connecting with the window in a sickening concussive blow. Red and white lights flashed behind my eyelids, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. A strange ringing silence, thick and heavy, and in that final fleeting moment of consciousness, as the darkness rushed in to claim me, my last coherent thought wasn't of work or my parents or the rain. It was of a faded photograph and a face I never knew. I never got to ask Eleanor about the woman in the photo. Awareness returns, not like a sunrise, but like a faulty switch, flicking on and off in a deep, dark cellar. One moment there is only the velvet nothingness of the crash, the next. There are sounds, a rhythmic metronomic beep, beep, beep. To my left, steady and indifferent. The soft synthetic whoosh of what I vaguely recognize as a ventilator. The smell, sharp, sterile, a chemical cleanness that scrapes the inside of my nose. Antiseptic. I try to open my eyes. Nothing happens. A jolt of pure cold panic, sharper than any physical pain, lances through my mind. Open your eyes, Zafira. The command is clear, an imperative scream from the control room of my brain, but the signal dies somewhere in transit. The connection is severed. The blinds remain drawn. I try to move my hand, a finger, anything. My mind strains, pushing against a wall of unresponsive flesh. It's like screaming into a vacuum. The intention is there, white-hot and desperate, but it produces no sound, no movement, no trace of its existence in the physical world. I am a ghost in my own machine, a prisoner in the collapsing architecture of my own body. The terror is a living thing, a suffocating blanket of black ice, and I am trapped beneath it. How long have I been here? A day? A week? Is this what it is to be dead? A conscious, powerless eternity? Then new sounds cut through the fog. Voices. Pressure is still climbing, doctor. Vitals are becoming unstable, a woman's voice says, taut with urgency. A nurse. I know Maria, a man's deeper, calmer voice replies. Did you reach her family? Her parents are on their way up now, the nurse says. They just arrived. My parents. The words are a lifeline. Through the suffocating terror, a flicker of primal childish hope ignites. Mom, Dad, they are here. They will fix this. They are the adults, the ones in charge. They will walk in, and their presence, their authority will force this broken world back into alignment. I hear the squeak of the door, the sound of expensive shoes on linoleum. I can smell my mother's perfume, that same Chanel No. 5, a scent I've always associated with distance, now a beacon in the darkness. Dr. Ramirez, my father's voice says, clipped and authoritative, the voice he uses in a courtroom. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, the Dr. Ramirez replies, his tone grave. Thank you for coming so quickly. Please have a seat. I hear the rustle of clothing. Let's start with what we know, Dr. Ramirez begins, his voice steady. Zafira was in a high-speed collision. She sustained multiple significant injuries, a fractured collarbone, 3 broken ribs, and some internal bleeding which we've managed to control. But our primary concern is the head trauma. He pauses, and I can feel the weight of that pause even here in my silent prison. She has what we call a severe traumatic brain injury. The impact caused significant swelling, and that swelling is putting a dangerous amount of pressure on her brainstem. Right now, she's in a deep coma. We've induced it medically to try and give her brain a chance to rest, but the intracranial pressure is still rising. He takes a breath. To be blunt, without immediate surgical intervention, to relieve that pressure, she will not survive the next 12 hours. Silence. The beeping of the monitor seems to grow louder. Each beep, a tick of a clock counting down my life. I scream at them in my mind. Do it whatever it is. Just do it, help me. Then my mother speaks. Her voice is not choked with tears. It is not trembling with fear. It is calm, appraising, like she's discussing a catering estimate. What are her chances, realistically, she asks, with the surgery? The procedure itself is high risk, Dr. Ramirez admits cautiously. There's a chance of further damage. But without it, there is no chance at all. With it, she has a fighting chance. But we need your consent to proceed. And the costs associated with this surgery? My father says, his voice a low, calculating rumble. And the subsequent long-term care? What's the financial exposure here? Dr. Ramirez audibly falters. Mr. Hayes, our priority right now is saving your daughter's life. We can discuss financials later. Doctor, my father interrupts, his voice taking on a smooth, almost placating tone that I know all too well. It's the voice he uses before he guts an opponent on the stand. There's a complexity you're not aware of. Zafira is our adopted daughter. The legal framework is informal. The word hangs in the air. Informal. A bomb wrapped in silk. My mother's voice joins his, a seamless harmony of betrayal. What my husband is trying to say is, we are not her legal next of kin for this kind of decision. We can't authorize this. We have no legal or financial responsibility. I don't understand, Dr. Ramirez says, his professional calm finally cracking. The shock in his voice is a small, bitter validation of my own. She lists you as her emergency contacts. She's your daughter. She is a woman who has lived in our home, my father's voice says now, and it is as cold and as hard as ice. We fulfilled our obligation to her until she was 18. This is a matter for the state. The nurse Maria speaks up, her voice trembling slightly with outrage. But sir, her grandmother Eleanor Vance, we were notified by her attorney. Mrs. Vance passed away from a heart attack 2 days ago. Zafira is the sole beneficiary of her estate. It's substantial. 2 blows, one after the other. Eleanor is gone. The thought is a fresh agony, a new deeper chasm opening up beneath me. My sanctuary, my lifeline, gone. And in the same breath, the reason for my parents' chilling calculus becomes clear. There is a new kind of silence in the room, a silence of shared unspoken understanding between my parents. I can feel their exchanged glance even with my eyes closed. Then David speaks, his voice quick and dismissive. My mother-in-law was not of sound mind when she made that will. We are already in the process of contesting it, on behalf of our other daughter, Jessica. For Jessica, the final piece of the puzzle slots into place. They're not just abandoning me, they're clearing the board. So you are refusing to authorize the surgery? Dr. Ramirez asks, his voice now stripped of all warmth, leaving only cold professional fury. We are formally relinquishing all responsibility, my mother confirms. Please direct any future inquiries to the state. Do not contact us again. The squeak of the door, the sound of their expensive shoes receding down the hallway. They are gone. They have left me here to die. And in the silent, screaming black abyss of my own mind, the hope that had flickered just moments before is extinguished, plunged into a darkness so complete, so absolute, that the only thing left to burn is rage. In the deafening silence left by their departure, a new sound emerged. Not the indifferent beeping of the monitor, but the sharp, furious exhale of a man pushed past his limit. Get legal on the phone, Dr. Ramirez's voice commanded, no longer calm, but a low, dangerous rumble. Now, and get me a copy of the On-Call Ethics Committee charter. If they think they can walk away from this, they have no idea what this hospital is capable of. The nurse Maria, her voice trembling, said, Doctor, what do? We do our job, he shot back, and I felt a presence beside my bed. His voice was closer now, speaking to me, the silent, entombed ghost. Zafira, my name is Dr. Ramirez. I am your doctor, and I am not going to let you die. Do you hear me? We are taking you into surgery. Right now? That was the last thing I heard before the world dissolved into a new kind of darkness, a purposeful oblivion. And in that void, for the first time since the crash, I wasn't alone. A stranger's righteous anger stood guard at the gates. It was a strange, fragile, and utterly ferocious glimmer of hope. Time after that became a fractured, viscous thing. An eternity passed in the space between beeps. I swam through murky depths of drug-induced sleep, surfacing occasionally into the dim reality of the ICU. My body was a landscape of pain I could feel but not command. A dull, grinding ache in my bones, a sharp, insistent throbbing behind my eyes, the raw chafing of the ventilator tube in my throat. I was a collection of broken parts, and the architect who knew how to put them back together was trapped in the ruins. It was in one of those brief, foggy moments of awareness that I heard him. Footsteps, not the measured tread of a doctor or the soft crepe soles of a nurse, but the frantic stumbling rhythm of someone running. Which room, Zafira Hayes? A voice said, breathless with panic. A voice that cut through the fog like a lighthouse beam. Ben. Sir, you can't go in there, a nurse began. Like hell I can't, he retorted, and then the sounds were closer. Oh my God! Z, can you hear me? I screamed his name in my head. Ben, I'm here, I'm right here, but my lips were still my throat, blocked by the tube that was keeping me alive. Dr. Ramirez's voice intervened, firm but gentle. Sir, I'm Dr. Ramirez. I'm her neurologist. What happened? I got a call. Her parents? Where are her parents? Ben demanded, his voice a raw mix of confusion and fear. That's a complicated question, the doctor said carefully. Right now, we need to know your relationship to the patient. I'm Ben Carter, he said, his voice ringing with a fierce, unwavering certainty. I'm her business partner. I'm her best friend. He paused, his breath catching. I'm her family, the only one she's really got. Yes, I thought, a wave of desperate, grateful relief washing over me. Yes, you are. From that moment on, his voice became my anchor. The days bled into one another, a blur of medical procedures, hushed conversations, and the constant dull throb of my own brokenness. The battle wasn't just physical, it was a war waged in the silent pathways of my own mind. I would spend what felt like hours concentrating all my will on a single task, move your index finger, and my body would remain a dead weight. The signal would leave my brain full of fire and intent and simply vanish. A 404 error in my own nervous system. The frustration was a physical thing, a hot, choking rage that had nowhere to go. Reboot, damn you, I would scream at myself. Execute the command. Then one afternoon, during a long, quiet stretch, where the only sound was the beeping of the monitor, I focused on my left eyelid. I imagined the muscle, the nerve, the simple command. I poured every ounce of my rage, my grief for Eleanor, my hatred for my parents, into that one tiny point. And it happened, a flicker, a barely perceptible twitch. It was the smallest movement I had ever made, and it was the most triumphant moment of my life. I had found a key, just one tiny key in a fortress of locked doors. But it was enough. It was a start. Ben was there every day. He'd sit for hours reading me articles from tech journals, updating me on the company, telling me stupid jokes. He never treated me like I was gone. He talked to me as if I were just listening. One afternoon, about 2 weeks in, his voice was different, heavier. He pulled his chair closer to my bed, and the usual cheerful chatter was gone. "Z," he began, his voice low. "Marcus Thorne, your grandmother's lawyer, he's been in touch. He's running interference for us." He sighed, a sound heavy with disgust. "Look, there's no easy way to say this. Your parents, they filed a petition with the court." I waited, the beeping of the monitor seeming to slow down. "They're seeking an emergency conservatorship over your affairs," he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "They're claiming that because of your condition, you're incapacitated. They're asking the judge to give them control of everything, your finances, the company." He paused. "Eleanor's estate." And there it was, the breathtaking, stunning, perfect hypocrisy of it all. It was so perfectly them, so logical in its absolute moral bankruptcy, that a hysterical laugh bubbled up inside my silent mind. "They leave you to die." I thought the words forming with the cold, sharp clarity of a diamond. Then they use the fact that you're not dead enough to try and steal from you. It was the next day that Jessica came. She wafted into the room in a cloud of bright floral perfume and suffocating sympathy. She carried a bouquet of lilies whose scent was cloying in the sterile air. "Oh, Zafira," she whispered, her eyes wide and wet with performative tears. She reached out and touched my unmoving hand, her touch light and useless. "Oh, you poor thing. We're all so worried. Mom and Dad are just a wreck. They can't even bring themselves to come here. They can't bear to see you like this. Dad's been so stoic trying to handle all of Grandma's legal stuff. It's all such a mess." I stared at the blank white ceiling, my newfound ability to flicker my eyelid forgotten. I tried to pour all the truth, all the horror into my eyes. "Look at me, Jess. It's a lie. They left me. They're stealing from you, too." But she didn't see it. She looked at me and saw a tragedy, a broken object of pity, a sister whose mind was as shattered as her body. She patted my hand again, her expression one of profound, sorrowful misunderstanding. "Don't you worry," she said, her voice bright with a terrible false optimism. "Daddy's taking care of everything. You just focus on getting better." She left a few minutes later, the scent of her lilies a sickening sweetness in the air. And in the silence she left behind, I understood. Jessica wasn't a villain. She was something far more dangerous. She was the flawless, beautiful living proof of their lie. She was the audience they performed for the reason they needed me to either die quietly or live as a mindless, helpless ward. And I knew with a certainty that burned away the last vestiges of my grief and left only cold, hard rage. I would do neither. Jessica's visit was the spark that lit the fuse. The rage that had been a slow, simmering burn in the silent darkness of my mind now became a white-hot forge. Every physical therapy session, every painful attempt to reconnect mind and muscle was fueled by the image of her sorrowful, pitying face, and the monstrous lie that stood behind it. Spite, I discovered, is a powerful motivator. It's the body's own high-octane fuel. My progress became relentless. The single eyelid flicker became a system: 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Ben Ever, the engineer, saw the potential immediately. Within a day, he had a laminated alphabet board propped on my bedside table. My world opened up. The process was agonizingly slow, a painstaking journey across the alphabet, 1 blink at a time. My first message to him took nearly 10 minutes to spell out. THANKYOU. His eyes welled up and he had to turn away for a moment. Anytime, Z. He choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Anytime. From there, the dam broke. The neural pathways, once shattered, began to reform, forged in the fire of my determination. The blinks became more controlled. The physical therapist, amazed at my progress, began working on my vocal cords, weakened from disuse, and the ventilator. Days were filled with excruciating exercises, pushes of air, and frustrated guttural sounds. Until one rainy afternoon, nearly a month after the crash, I managed to push a single rasping, broken word past my lips. It was quiet, barely more than a breath, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Lawyer. Ben, who had been reading a tech blog aloud, froze. He slowly lowered his tablet, his eyes wide. What did you say?" he whispered. I gathered every ounce of my strength, focused on the raw mechanics of breath and sound, and said it again, clearer this time. "Lawyer?" A slow, wide grin spread across Ben's face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a fierce, triumphant energy. "Yes, absolutely, on it." Marcus Thorne arrived the next day. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and impeccably dressed, with kind, intelligent eyes that held a deep sadness. He had been Eleanor's lawyer and her friend for over 40 years. He sat by my bed, his leather briefcase resting on his lap, and listened patiently as Ben explained the conservatorship filing and my parents' actions at the hospital. Marcus showed no surprise, only a profound, weary disgust. "I see," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone when Ben had finished. He then looked directly at me. "Zafira, your grandmother was a remarkable woman, one of the sharpest I have ever known. She was also not one to be trifled with even in death." He opened his briefcase. "Your adoption," he began, his voice leaving no room for doubt, "was not informal. It was ironclad, executed with all the legal precision your father, ironically enough, is known for. His claim to the contrary is a blatant, provable fraud." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And that is just the beginning." He placed a hand on a handsome walnut box inside his briefcase. "Eleanor left this for you. She called it her legacy box. She asked me to give it to you personally when I felt you were ready." My heart hammered against my ribs. The legacy box. It was real. "I believe," Marcus said, his eyes meeting mine with a shared understanding, "that time is now." He left the box with me, promising to begin the legal counter-assault immediately. That afternoon, Ben brought me my laptop. The moment my fingers touched the familiar cool metal of the keyboard, I felt a piece of myself click back into place. My body was still a prison, but my mind was now free. I was the ghost in the machine, and I was about to start haunting. My expertise wasn't just in writing code, it was in understanding systems, and a legal battle, a family drama. These were just systems like any other. They had inputs, outputs, vulnerabilities, and exploitable bugs. I directed the fight from my bed, my whispers to Ben becoming a stream of commands. "Ben," I rasped one afternoon, my voice slowly gaining strength. "The hospital, visitor logs. I need every entry from the day of the accident." "Got it," he'd say, typing furiously on his own laptop. "Security cameras," I'd continue. "What's the data retention policy for the ICU waiting areas and hallways? Find out. I want to know who has access to those archives." On it, I had him build a secure encrypted database, a digital war room where we could collate every piece of information, every nurse's report, every doctor's notation, every legal filing from the opposition. My mind, which had felt so foggy for so long, was now sharp, clear, and utterly focused. I was designing the most important piece of software of my life, the complete and total deconstruction of David and Linda Hayes. It was during this time that Jess visited again. She brought a gossip magazine and a smoothie she claimed was packed with antioxidants. She chattered brightly about a colleague's wedding, about a new restaurant in Bellevue, about the terrible burden all this legal nonsense was putting on our parents. "Dad is just so stressed," she sighed, fluffing my pillows with a practiced nurse-like efficiency. "He's trying to manage Eleanor's estate, but the lawyers are making everything so complicated. He's just trying to make sure everything is taken care of for you, you know, for when you get better." I watched her, my face, a carefully constructed mask of placid stillness. I didn't try to blink a message. I didn't try to speak. I just watched her perform, and I saw it all with a terrible, chilling clarity. She wasn't lying to me. She was telling her own truth, the carefully curated story she had been fed her entire life. A story in which her parents were benevolent protectors, and I was the fragile, brilliant, but ultimately helpless project they managed. She believed it. And in that moment I knew her belief was the linchpin of their entire narrative. If she ever stopped believing, the whole thing would collapse. She stood to leave, patting my arm. "You just rest, Z. Let us handle the messy stuff." After she left, the scent of her cloying perfume lingering in the air, I turned my head on the pillow and looked at Ben, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, observing the entire exchange. My voice was still weak, a ghost of its former self, but the words were pure steel. "She's not just a bystander," I whispered, the effort making me ache. Ben looked at me, his expression grim. He understood. "She's the audience they perform for," I finished, my eyes burning with a cold fire. "And it's time to bring down the curtain." That night, after the nurses had completed their final rounds and the hospital had settled into a hushed nocturnal rhythm, I was finally alone with the box. It sat on the rolling table over my bed, a simple, unadorned walnut box, but it felt as heavy as a coffin or a vault. Ben had offered to stay, but I had shaken my head, a small, definite movement. This I had to do alone. My hands, still prone to trembling with fatigue, were surprisingly steady as I lifted the lid. The air inside smelled of old paper cedar and Eleanor's faint, familiar scent of lavender. It wasn't an archive of chaos. It was like its creator, meticulously organized. Each document was housed in a protective sleeve, each section divided by a carefully labeled tab. This was the work of a woman who knew she was preparing for war. The first thing I touched was a worn, leather-bound journal, her journal. I opened it to a page bookmarked with a faded blue ribbon. The entry was dated October 29 years ago, just weeks after I was brought home. October 14th, it read in Eleanor's elegant, slanting script. "Linda called today. She's pregnant." She was crying, but not with joy. "What am I supposed to do with two of them, Mother?" she asked me. "We just got this one settled." This one. Not Zafira, not my daughter. This one. I tried to tell her what a blessing it was to have two beautiful girls, but I could hear the calculation in her voice. David got on the line. He called it unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. As if my granddaughter, my beautiful, quiet, perfect granddaughter, was an ill-timed business expense. I kept reading, my fingers tracing her words. Page after page chronicled their growing resentment. May a year later, Jess is the sun and the moon to them. She smiles and they melt. Zafira took her first steps today. I was the only one who saw. Linda was busy framing a new photo of Jessica for the mantelpiece. September 5 years later, I confronted David about his coldness toward Zafira. He told me I was being sentimental. "She's a self-sufficient child, Eleanor," he said. "She doesn't need coddling. Jessica is more sensitive." He wasn't describing her. He was writing her off. The journal was a 30-year testament to a quiet, insidious cruelty. The slights I had felt my whole life weren't figments of my imagination. They were real. They were documented. Each entry was a small, sharp piece of glass, and together they formed a mosaic of the truth. Beneath the journal was a thick portfolio labeled, Vance Cedar Holdings. I pulled it out. The will I knew about was on top, but it was just the cover page. The real inheritance wasn't just Eleanor's house and savings. It was a trust. An irrevocable trust established by my great-grandfather, tied to a significant minority stake in a private family-run timber company, a Vance family enterprise. And then I saw the name on the trust documents. It was not in the name of Zephira Hayes. It was in the name of Zephira Vance. My breath caught in my throat. I read on my eyes, flying across the legal jargon. The trust's beneficiary was designated as the sole surviving heir of the bloodline of Catherine Vance. And there, in an attached, notarized document, was the explanation. The woman in the photograph, her name was Catherine Vance. She was Eleanor's other daughter, my biological mother. She had died in childbirth, naming the baby she would never meet Zephira. And Eleanor was not my adoptive grandmother. She was my biological grandmother, the only one I had left. The Hayes family had no legal claim to this trust, not a single penny. It was mine by blood, my blood. The next section was labeled Correspondence. It was a collection of photocopied letters, a one-sided conversation spanning a decade. They were all from David Hayes, addressed to the legal firm that administered the Vance Trust. Letter after letter filled with complex legal arguments, attempting to have himself named a co-trustee. Citing my age, my emotional fragility, his position as my guardian. He had been trying to get his hands on this for years. He knew. The whole time he knew. Tucked at the back of this section was the most damning document of all, a sworn, notarized affidavit signed by Eleanor Vance just 6 months ago. On the evening of my 75th birthday, she had written my son-in-law David Hayes spoke with me in my study. He was again inquiring about the Vance Trust. He stated that Zephira was unprepared for such a responsibility. He then said, and I quote him directly, "Should she ever become a problem or in any way incapacitated, it would be a simple matter for us to have her declared legally incompetent. It would be for her own good, of course, to protect the family assets." To protect the family assets, not to protect me. My entire life, my entire identity, had been a variable in their long-term financial strategy. My hands were shaking now, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. At the very bottom of the box was a single sealed envelope of heavy cream stationery. My name was written on the front in her familiar script. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. "My dearest Zephira," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have failed in my most important promise to tell you the truth myself. Please forgive an old woman's cowardice. It is one thing to live with a truth. It is another to speak it aloud and watch it break the heart of the person you love most in this world. The woman you saw in the photograph was my daughter Catherine, your mother. She was a firefly, brilliant and beautiful, and gone too soon. She loved you from the moment she knew you existed. Giving you up was not a choice she made lightly, but she wanted you to have a mother and a father, a stability she couldn't provide. And I thought I was doing the right thing. I gave you to my other daughter Linda and her husband. I thought I could keep you in the family, watch you grow. It was my greatest mistake. I trapped you with them. I saw their coldness, their favoritism, and I told myself it would get better. I was wrong. They are not your family by choice, but by my error. I am your family by blood. Everything that is Vance is yours. It is your birthright. I kept the secret for so long because I was afraid of David, not of his anger, but of his legal power. I was afraid he would find a way to take this from you before you were old enough and strong enough to fight him. I see now that you have been strong enough for a very long time. I had to stop my vision, blurred by tears that were hot and thick, with a grief so profound it felt like drowning. I took a ragged breath and read the final lines. Know that I have loved you completely, without condition, from the moment your mother placed you in my arms. The enclosed documents are not weapons, my love. They are a key. They built your cage, my love. I am giving you the key, not for revenge, but for freedom. Live your life not as their shadow, but as a Vance, as my granddaughter, as yourself. All my love always, Eleanor. I lowered the letter. The tears stopped, the shaking stopped. The grief for my grandmother was still there, a great hollow ache in my chest, but it was now surrounded by something else, something cold and hard and immovable. It was the steel of certainty. This was never about a daughter they couldn't love. It was about a trust they couldn't touch. My entire life of feelingless then, my achievements that were never quite enough, their constant subtle dismissals. It wasn't personal. It was business. I looked at my own faint reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I saw the green eyes of Catherine Vance staring back at me. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of an architect. And I finally had the blueprints. The fight for my inheritance was no longer just a fight. It was the claiming of my life. The day I was discharged from Harborview was gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of my mood. It wasn't the triumphant walk into the sunshine I might have imagined. My body was still a fragile, healing thing. I walked with a cane each step, a deliberate conscious effort, and a web of faint silvery scars traced the lines of my face. But my mind was a fortress. Ben was waiting for me at the discharge doors, his car idling. He didn't drive me back to my condo. My sleek minimalist home was the first place they would look, a place now tainted by my old life. Instead, we drove to downtown Seattle to a discreet, obscenely expensive extended-stay hotel called the Ethel. Ben had booked a suite on the 32nd floor under the name Eleanor Vance. "A little poetic justice," he said with a grim smile as he handed me the keycard. "And the security here is top-notch. Facial recognition, key-carded elevators, Fort Knox with better room service." The suite became my command center, my war room. It was sterile and impersonal, which was perfect. I didn't want comfort. I wanted efficiency. Ben set up a network that was virtually untraceable, bouncing signals through so many proxies it would make a state-sponsored hacker weep. From this secluded perch overlooking the city that thought I was still a tragic victim, I began to build my case. The days fell into a new, relentless rhythm. My life became a montage of meticulous, focused work. Mornings were for physical therapy, for pushing my broken body to obey each painful stretch and lift a down payment on the strength I would need. The rest of the day was for war. Marcus Thorne would arrive every afternoon, his briefcase filled with legal motions and counterfilings. We'd sit at the suite's large dining table, which was now buried under stacks of documents from Eleanor's legacy box. "Their petition for conservatorship is built on a foundation of lies," he'd say, pointing to a line in their filing. "They claim a lifetime of devoted parenting. Eleanor's journal will burn that claim to the ground." "It's not enough to disprove their lies, Marcus." I'd tell him, my voice still raspy, but gaining strength each day. "I want to prove their intent. I want a judge to see this wasn't an act of panicked grief. It was a calculated business decision." While Marcus built the legal framework, I directed the intelligence gathering. "Ben," I said one evening, pointing to a name in one of the letters from the Vance Trust's administrators. "This man, Arthur Galloway, he signed most of the rejection letters to my father. He's the lead trustee. I need to know everything about him." "On it," Ben replied, already typing. "And I want a PI, I continued. "Not one of your dad's old-school guys. I want someone young digital, someone who understands data trails. I want to see David and Linda's credit card statements for the last 6 months. I want to know if they've been meeting with wealth managers or probate litigators." Ben found a woman named Kira, a former NSA analyst who could pull a person's entire digital life apart without leaving a fingerprint. The reports she sent back were illuminating. Lavish dinners, purchases from high-end art dealers, and 2 separate consultations with one of Seattle's most ruthless estate litigation attorneys, one of them taking place the day after my accident, the day after they left me to die. But my masterstroke, the part of the plan that was truly mine, was the digital trap. "Their arrogance is their greatest vulnerability," I explained to Ben late one night, sketching a diagram on a whiteboard we'd brought into the suite. "They believe they are smarter than everyone in the room. They believe Eleanor's house is their property. They will try to get inside before the court settles anything. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We let them," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "And we watch." Ben knew a guy, a freelance security consultant and white hat hacker named Dex, whose personal hygiene was questionable, but whose skills were legendary. Under my precise direction, Dex paid a visit to the house on Orcas Island. First, the locks were changed, every single one. Then the new keys, which Marcus would eventually send to my parents as a courtesy, were subtly marked with a resin that was invisible to the naked eye, but would glow under UV light. A small detail, but in court details, are everything. Next came the surveillance. Dex outfitted the house with a suite of tiny, high-definition cameras and microphones. They were hidden in smoke detectors in the back of picture frames inside the guts of an old grandfather clock in the study. They were all linked to a secure encrypted server that streamed directly to my laptop. Finally, we set the bait, the honeypot. "Marcus," I said over the phone, "when you inform them of their court-approved visit, I want you to mention that a preliminary legal document has been left for them to review. A draft settlement offer." "An offer?" Marcus asked, confused. "We're not offering them anything." "It will seem like an offer," I clarified. "It will offer them a ridiculously small, almost insulting piece of Eleanor's liquid assets in exchange for dropping the conservatorship claim. It's designed to do two things. First, it will make them feel like we're scared, like we're willing to deal. And second, it will make them overconfident. It will make them talk." The final piece of the architecture was the letter. I spent 3 days writing it. The first draft was a torrent of rage and pain. I shredded it. The second was a cold clinical recitation of facts. It was powerful, but it lacked a soul. I crumpled it up. On the third day, I stopped trying to write to them. I wasn't writing a letter to them. I was writing a verdict, a final judgment. I simply stated the facts. Their words at the hospital quoted verbatim. The timeline of their legal filings cross-referenced with my ICU chart, the truth of my parentage, the decades of their attempts to seize the Vance trust. I included copies of the most damning pages from Eleanor's journal and David's own letters. It was a closing argument in a trial they didn't even know they were a part of. I wrote the final paragraph in a state of calm, crystalline clarity. This letter is not a plea for an apology, nor is it an invitation for reconciliation. Those doors are closed. This letter is a notification. I am not your project to be managed, your asset to be liquidated, or your victim to be pitied. I am the granddaughter of Eleanor Vance, and you are trespassing on my property and in my life for the last time. Your claims are fraudulent. Your concern is a performance, and your parental rights are hereby revoked. I paused, thinking of the perfect final word, not a word of anger or forgiveness or love or hate, a word of pure, final, absolute power, a word from my world, an architectural term for removing an element from a design. I picked up my pen and added the last line. "You will not have my inheritance. You will not have my conservatorship. And as of this moment, you will no longer have me. You are dismissed." The call from Marcus came on a Tuesday morning. The sky outside my hotel window was a flat, uninspiring gray. I was in the middle of a painful series of leg lifts with my physical therapist, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Chloe, when my phone vibrated on the table. "You need a break anyway," Chloe said, seeing the name on the screen. "Your quads are about to file a formal complaint." I nodded, my breath coming in ragged bursts, and answered the call. "Marcus," I said. "Zafira," he replied, his voice calm but with an underlying current of energy. "They made a move, a predictable one, but a move nonetheless." I sat up straighter, the ache in my leg instantly forgotten. "Tell me." "David filed a motion for an emergency hearing," he explained, citing his deep concern for the neglect of his late mother-in-law's property. He's petitioned the court for one-time access to the house on Orcas Island. The official reason is to retrieve items of deep personal and sentimental value and to assess the property for any immediate maintenance needs on behalf of the estate. I almost laughed. The gall of it was breathtaking, My father, who hadn't visited Eleanor more than twice a year, was now her devoted protector. "And the judge?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Judge Albright granted it," Marcus confirmed, a hint of frustration in his voice. "David is still a respected officer of his court. On the surface, the request seems reasonable. Albright sees you as a grieving young woman still in recovery, and them as concerned, if overbearing, parents." He paused. "She granted them a 4-hour window of access this Saturday, from 2 to 6 p.m. This was it, the opening, the vulnerability in their firewall. They had just walked willingly into the system I had designed. There's one more thing," Marcus added, "a stipulation. To ensure propriety, Jessica must be present for the entire duration of the visit." A chill went down my spine. It was perfect, more perfect than I could have designed. The judge, in an attempt to be fair, had handed me my star witness. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear, "it's time to send the Trojan horse." An hour later, Marcus forwarded me the draft of the email he was sending to my father's lawyer. It was a masterpiece of formal legalese officially notifying them of the court-approved access. Tucked into the third paragraph was the payload. Furthermore, it read as a professional courtesy, and in the interest of potentially expediting these painful proceedings, please be advised that a preliminary draft document regarding a potential resolution has been left on the desk in the study for your client's review. We believe it represents a potential path forward and await your response at your earliest convenience. The bait was sublime. It was respectful, professional, and dangled the one thing my father couldn't resist the belief that he was winning. Now came the hardest part, the variable I couldn't entirely control, my sister. That evening I sat staring at her contact photo on my phone for a long, long time. It was a picture of the two of us from a few years ago at a family Christmas party. She was laughing, her arm slung around my shoulder. I was smiling, a polite, distant smile that didn't reach my eyes. A perfect summary of our entire relationship. My hands trembled as I pressed the call button. I was gambling not just on my plan, but on the faint flickering hope that somewhere beneath years of practiced naivete there was a piece of my sister that was still real. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary. "Zafira." "Hi, Jess," I said, keeping my own voice even devoid of accusation. "I heard you're going to the island on Saturday." There was a silence on her end. "Yeah," she finally said. Dad said the court wanted me to make sure everything was okay." "I'm not calling to fight about it," I said quickly. "I'm not calling to ask you to take my side. I'm asking for a favor." "A favor?" she asked, the suspicion in her voice palpable. "Yes," I said. "When you're there, at the house, I'm not asking you to snoop. I'm not asking you to steal anything." I took a breath, choosing my next words with surgical precision. "I'm just asking you to listen. That's it. Just listen to what they say when they think no one else is around, when they're just talking to each other. Will you do that for me?" The line was silent for so long I thought she had hung up. I could hear the gears turning in her head, the conflict, the confusion. "Listen to what?" she finally whispered. "You'll know," I replied softly. "Just open your ears, that's all I ask." Another pause. Then a barely audible, "Okay, Z, okay, I'll listen." When the call ended, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The seed was planted. The rest was up to them. Saturday arrived crisp and clear. The air in the conference room at Marcus Thorne's downtown law firm was thick with anticipation. The room was sterile corporate, a long mahogany table, leather chairs, a skyline view of the city, but today it felt like a NASA control room on launch day. At the head of the table, a 70-inch monitor was split into a multi-panel display showing the live feeds from the 4 hidden cameras inside Eleanor's house. The empty living room, the quiet dining room, the sun-drenched study, the front porch overlooking the sound. The image was perfectly clear. The audio was a low ambient hum. I stood by the window, my weight resting heavily on my cane. I was pale, I knew, and there were dark circles under my eyes, but I felt a strange electric calm. I was an architect watching the final stress test of her most complex design. Ben stood beside me, a silent, steady presence. He had a cup of coffee in his hand that he hadn't touched. Marcus sat at the table, his hands steepled his face, a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see the tension in his jaw. At 1:58 p.m., a notification popped up on my laptop. The island's ferry terminal camera had picked up a silver Mercedes disembarking. Ben put a supportive hand on my shoulder, his warmth grounding me. "They're early," he murmured. I looked at the screens at the empty waiting rooms of my grandmother's house. I thought of the letter waiting on the dining room table. I thought of the video file loaded on the laptop in the study. I thought of my sister walking unknowingly into the biggest truth of her life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. I took a deep breath, and the architect inside me took over, cool and calm and certain. "Showtime," I whispered. At 2 o'clock precisely, the silver Mercedes crunched onto the gravel driveway of Eleanor's house. On the monitor in our command center, the image was perfectly dispassionately clear. It felt like watching a nature documentary, predators approaching a watering hole. David emerged first, looking crisp and impatient in a cashmere sweater, already checking the time on his Rolex. Linda glided out of the passenger side, her face shielded by oversized sunglasses, her expression one of bored entitlement, as if arriving at a property she already owned. And then there was Jess. She lingered by the car door, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself, her movements hesitant, anxious. She looked small against the backdrop of the towering cedar trees. She looked like a lamb being led to slaughter. "For heaven's sake, Jessica, stop dawdling!" Linda's voice crackled through our speakers sharp and clear. "It's cold!" My father fumbled with the new key at the front door. "Damn it," he muttered. "Sticks! Why would Thorne bother changing the locks?" "To be difficult, darling," Linda replied, tapping her foot. "It's what his kind does." When the door finally swung open, they stepped inside. In the conference room, the three of us, me, Ben, and Marcus, leaned forward in unison. The trap was sprung. Linda predictably began her appraisal immediately. She ran a manicured finger over the antique sideboard in the hallway, her head tilted. "This is 19th century, you know," she announced. "It would look perfect in the Palm Springs condo. Make a note, Jessica." Jess just stood there, her eyes wide, taking in the house, not as a collection of assets, but as a place she remembered, a place that smelled like her grandmother. "We're here for sentimental items, Mom," she said quietly. "Don't be naive," Linda snapped, not even looking at her. "Everything here is sentimental to someone." Meanwhile, David had made a beeline for the study, just as I knew he would. The camera in the grandfather clock captured him perfectly as he picked up the honeypot document from the desk. We watched him scan the pages, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He walked back out into the living room holding the document like a trophy. "Well, well, well," he said, tapping the papers. "It seems our friend Marcus Thorne is getting nervous. He's offering a settlement." "How much?" Linda asked instantly, her eyes lighting up. "It's an insult, a pittance," David scoffed. "But that's not the point." He looked from his wife to his daughter, his voice dropping into a low conspiratorial tone that the microphones captured with chilling fidelity. "This is a sign of weakness. It's a start. That idiot lawyer knows his case is built on sand. Once we have the conservatorship, once we are in control, we can invalidate this flimsy offer and get our hands on the real prize, the whole timber trust." Jess looked from her father to her mother, a flicker of confusion and doubt crossing her face. My heart ached for her. Linda, seeing her daughter's expression, put a comforting arm around her shoulder. It was a practiced, chilling gesture. "Don't look so glum, Jessica," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "This is for your future. You know, Zafira was never practical. She was brilliant with her little computers, yes, but she wouldn't know what to do with this kind of legacy. We are protecting it for the family. Listen, Jess," I pleaded with the screen. "Just listen." It was then that my mother noticed it. the single elegant cream envelope sitting in the exact center of the polished mahogany dining room table. "What's this?" she asked, walking toward it. "Probably more legal nonsense from Thorne," David said dismissively. He took the envelope from her, glanced at the front where David, Linda, and Jessica Hayes was written, and tore it open with an air of casual arrogance. I held my breath. In our war room, the only sound was the low hum of the servers. We watched their faces on the monitor. As David read, his smirk slowly faded, replaced by a tight, rigid confusion. His brows furrowed. He handed the pages to Linda, whose perfectly composed face began to crumble, the carefully constructed mask cracking line by line. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "This is insane." "What does it say?" Jess asked, stepping forward. She reached for the letter, but David held it away from her, a reflex of control. "It's nothing," he said sharply. "It's just Zafira, lashing out. She's confused, unwell." "Let me see," Jess insisted, her voice stronger than I had ever heard it. She snatched the letter from his hand. We watched her eyes fly across the page. We saw the moment she reached the part about the hospital. Her face, already pale, went completely white. She looked up from the page, her eyes wide with horror, fixed on her parents. You said what?" She whispered the words barely audible. "It says here, you told the doctors she wasn't your responsibility, that you owed her nothing." "It's a lie." David sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "She's twisting things. We were in shock, Jessica. You can't imagine the pressure. But this letter," Jess continued, her voice trembling as she kept reading, "it says there's a file on the laptop." She turned. The laptop sat on the sideboard, exactly where we'd placed it. Before David or Linda could move, Jess walked toward it, her movement stiff automatic. She lifted the lid. The screen glowed to life, showing a single video file icon labeled ICU, Admission, Zafira Hayes. "Jessica, don't!" my mother pleaded, her voice suddenly shrill with panic. But Jess didn't seem to hear. With a trembling finger, she double-clicked the icon, and then their own voices filled the silent, sunlit house. The audio was pristine, captured by the Ethics Committee's secondary recording. Dr. Ramirez's voice, without immediate surgical intervention. "She will not survive," Linda's voice. "What are her chances realistically?" David's voice. "What's the financial exposure here?" The conversation played out, every cold, calculated word echoing in the room. Jess stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. And then came the final damning exchange. Dr. Ramirez's voice. "She's your daughter." David's voice cold and clear as a winter sky. "She is a woman who has lived in our home. This is a matter for the state." Linda's voice. "We are formally relinquishing all responsibility." The audio file ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any sound. Jess slowly lowered her hand. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were filled with a terrible, dawning clarity. She stumbled back a step, looking at the two people she had called Mom and Dad her entire life as if they were complete and terrifying strangers. "It's true," she sobbed, a raw, ragged sound of a heart breaking. "All of it." The spell was broken. David, his face a mask of pure fury and trapped desperation, lunged for the laptop. "That's enough!" He roared, his hand raised as if to smash the screen to destroy the evidence, to silence the truth. But it was too late. On the monitor in our downtown command center, the feed was perfect. The audio was captured, the truth was out, and we had it all. David's lunge for the laptop was pathetic, an instinctive, desperate act of a man trying to physically destroy a truth that was already loose in the world. He stopped himself, just short of smashing it, his hand hovering, his chest heaving. On the monitor in our command center, the scene in Eleanor's house had devolved from a tense drama into pure, unadulterated chaos. Jess stumbled back from him, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a sob or perhaps a scream. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice a ragged tear in the silence. She wasn't just crying anymore. This was something deeper. This was the sound of a world breaking. "Jessica, listen to me." My father began, his voice attempting to reclaim its old authority, but it was frayed thin. "This is a gross misrepresentation, a deep fake. It's edited, taken out of context." "Context," she shrieked, and the sound was so raw, so full of anguish it made me flinch. "What possible context is there for leaving your daughter to die, for haggling over her life like she was a piece of real estate? We were protecting the family's assets." My mother interjected, her voice shrill with a desperate, self-serving logic. "For you, for your future." And that was the line that broke her. Jess stared at my mother, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. "For me," she repeated slowly, the words dripping with a venom I had never heard from her before. "You destroyed her for me." She let out a laugh, a wild, broken sound that held no humor. Her whole life you treated her like an obligation, a project you had to manage, and oh God. She pressed her fists to her temples, her body shaking. "I let you. I believed you. I thought she was the difficult one. I thought I was the good daughter." She looked around the beautiful sunlit room as if seeing it and them for the very first time. The carefully constructed stage set of her life had been ripped down, revealing the cold, ugly machinery behind it. "I need to go," she whispered, grabbing her purse from a nearby chair. I can't breathe in here." "Jessica, you are not to leave this house," my father commanded, taking a step toward her. She flinched back from him as if from a hot flame. "Don't," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous warning. "Don't you touch me." She turned and fled, not walking but running. The front door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the house, a final definitive punctuation mark. On the screen, David and Linda stood alone, two statues amidst the wreckage of their own making. In the conference room, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since the video started playing. My legs suddenly felt weak and I gripped my cane until my knuckles were white. Ben's hand was a firm, steady pressure on my shoulder. Marcus Thorne, however, was already in motion. He was on his phone before the sound of the slamming door had faded. "Carla, it's Marcus," he said, his voice a blade of cold, efficient steel. "File it, the supplemental declaration with all video and audio exhibits. File it with the court right now, and draft the TRO, full protective order, David and Linda Hayes, 100 yards. Let's get it in front of Albright before she breaks for lunch." He hung up and looked at me, his eyes filled not with triumph, but with a somber resolve. "Checkmate," he said quietly. The next 24 hours were a blur of legal activity. David and Linda predictably went into a frenzy. We knew from Marcus's contacts that my father had called his own lawyer, screaming about illegal recordings and defamation of character. But it was useless. The audio from the ICU had been legally obtained via a hospital doctor documenting a potential ethics violation. The video from Eleanor's house was from a private residence now legally owned by me, the primary beneficiary. Their case, as Marcus had predicted, evaporated overnight. The news, though officially sealed in court filings, began to bleed out into Seattle's insular legal community. Whispers started at the Rainier Club, text messages flew between partners at major law firms. The pristine, carefully cultivated reputation of David and Linda Hayes had begun to crack. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about Jess. She showed up at my hotel that night. Ben answered the door, saw her tear-streaked, devastated face, and with a look of profound understanding, simply stepped aside and let her in. He met my eyes across the room, a silent question. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay, I've got this." He retreated into the suite's other bedroom, giving us our privacy. Jess stood in the middle of the living room, looking lost and small. She looked at me, really looked at me at the cane I leaned on, at the faint scars on my face, and a fresh wave of sobs racked her body. "I'm so sorry," she choked out the words muffled by her hands. "Z, I'm so sorry." I remained by the window, my own emotions a tangled, painful knot. There was vindication, yes, but there was no joy, only a deep, hollow ache. "Sorry for what, Jess?" I asked, my voice quiet. For all of it," she said, finally lowering her hands. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed. For not seeing it, for believing them, for every time I got the bigger piece of cake, for every time they praised me and dismissed you, I honestly thought it was because they just had higher standards for you, because you were so brilliant. She shook her head, a look of self-loathing twisting her features. But that wasn't it. It wasn't about standards. It was about inventory. You were one kind of asset, and I was another. I was the one they could love. She took a hesitant step closer. The things they said, in that hospital room, I will hear those words for the rest of my life, and I will hear my own silence right alongside them. She was apologizing, not just for her ignorance, but for her complicity, and she was right to. I didn't offer her a platitude. I didn't say it's not your fault, because in a way it was. We had both played our assigned parts in their production for 27 years. Instead, I gave her the only thing I had left to give, the truth. They built this house of lies, Jess, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. A beautiful, impressive, perfectly decorated house. You got to live in the master suite. I was in the attic, but we were both still trapped inside. I looked at her, at my sister, the only other person in the world who could truly understand the architecture of our specific damage. And now it's all come crashing down. I took a deep, painful breath. The question is, what do we do now? Do we sit here and cry in the rubble for the rest of our lives, or do we try to build something new? Tears were still streaming down her face, but for the first time, she met my gaze directly. In her eyes, I saw the end of the golden child. I saw the beginning of something else, something real. For the first time since I was a child, we were not the brilliant one and the charming one. We were just two sisters betrayed by the same people, standing together in the ruins. It's been a year since the unveiling, a year since the carefully constructed world of the Hayes family imploded in a sunlit room on Orcas Island. The legal fallout was, as Marcus had predicted, swift and brutal. The conservatorship case was dismissed with prejudice, a legal term that felt wholly inadequate for the scorched earth ruling Judge Albright delivered. Her written opinion was a masterclass in judicial fury, calling my parents' actions a shocking and predatory abuse of filial trust, and their behavior morally bankrupt. The ruling, though technically sealed, ripped through the Seattle establishment like a wildfire. My father was quietly and unanimously asked to step down from his firm's board. My mother's annual literacy gala was indefinitely postponed, the polite socialite term for canceled in disgrace. Within 6 months, they sold the sterile Bellevue mansion, liquidated what they could, and fled to a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona, a place where the sun is relentless and the memories are short. They vanished from our lives not with a bang, but with the quiet, rustling sound of a real estate closing. Today there is no echo of that chaos. I'm living in Eleanor's house now, my house. I spent the first 6 months after the legal battles ended lovingly restoring it. The old wood floors were refinished, the walls were painted in warm, soft colors, and the windows were replaced, letting the light pour in. It's no longer a silent sanctuary I escape to. It's a home, a place that is vibrant and alive, constantly filled with the low hum of conversation and the easy sound of laughter. Ben comes up from the city most weekends, his booming laugh echoing off the cedar walls as he argues with Jess about the merits of Marvel movies versus obscure indie films. He and I still run Apex, but I do it remotely now, my Spartan downtown condo, a distant memory. Our new logistics platform, the one I nearly died for, launched to massive success. We named the core algorithm Eleanor, and Jess is here. She lives in the small guest cottage down by the cove. Our relationship isn't a fairy tale. It isn't the seamless, giggling sisterhood you see in movies. It's something quieter, more fragile, and infinitely more real. It's built on cautious honesty and a shared unspoken understanding of the ruins we came from. We have dinner together every Sunday, a tradition we reclaimed from my grandmother. Sometimes we talk for hours. Sometimes we sit in comfortable silence. We are learning each other piece by piece without the filter of our parents' narrative. I've embraced the other part of my legacy, too. I took my seat on the board of Vance Cedar Holdings. At first, the old guard trustees looked at me the young tech CEO in their world of timber and tradition with deep skepticism. But I didn't come to them with my hand out. I came with a plan. I used my background in AI and logistics to design a new system for them, a platform to modernize their supply chain and implement sustainable forestry practices that will ensure the company, my family's company, thrives for another 100 years. I have discovered as much advance as I am a haze was a fiction. This afternoon, I'm sitting on the wide porch swing, a place that holds so many of Eleanor's ghost memories, watching the ferries glide across the sound. The air is cool-scented with salt and pine. My cane leans against the railing beside me, but I don't need it much anymore. The scars on my face have faded to pale, silvery lines, visible only if you know where to look. The screen door creaks open, and Jess comes out holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. She hands one to me, her smile small and genuine. She sits beside me on the swing, and we rock gently the rhythm a slow, steady heartbeat. We watch the water for a long time, the silence easy and full between us. "Do you ever hear from them?" she asks, finally, her voice quiet, almost carried away by the breeze. I look out at the horizon, at the place where the deep blue water meets the endless gray sky. I consider the question. I feel for the old ache, the phantom limb of a family that was never really there. But there is nothing, no anger, no pain, just a quiet, settled stillness. "No," I reply, my voice clear and steady, "and I don't need to." I take a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. Their chapter is closed. Jess nods, leaning her head on my shoulder for just a moment. It's a gesture that a year ago would have been impossible. Now it just feels right. I think about the letter, the one that started it all. For months I thought of it as an act of war, a weapon I had designed to burn their world to the ground. But I see it differently now. The letter wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. It wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of liberation. It was the demolition charge that had to be set, the one that allowed me to tear down the false, gilded structure of my old life so that I could finally build a true one in its place. A family built not of convenience, but of conviction. A life not given, but claimed. Sitting on that porch, watching the ferries glide across the water, I realized the story wasn't really about my parents anymore. It wasn't about the money or the betrayal or even the revenge I thought I wanted. It was about what happens after the demolition. It was about the lessons you learn in the rubble, and I wanted to share a few of those with you. The first lesson is about the truth. We often fear the truth because we think it will break us. But what I learned is that living inside a beautifully constructed lie is what truly keeps us broken. The truth can be a surgeon's scalpel. It's terrifying, and the cut is deep and painful. But it's the only thing that can remove the poison that's been killing you slowly for years. The lie is comfortable, but the truth is what finally sets you free. The second lesson is about family. For so long, I believed family was an obligation, a group of people you were assigned to a role you had to perform. But I was wrong. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. It's the person who brings you coffee in a hospital without being asked. It's the lawyer who fights for you out of principle, not just for a fee. It's the sister who is willing to tear down her own comfortable world to stand with you in the ruins. Family is a verb. It's an action. It's the people who, when your world goes dark, don't just offer you a candle. They sit with you in the darkness until your eyes adjust. And finally, there's a lesson about anger. My rage, it saved my life. It was the fuel that warmed me when I was freezing the raw energy that forced my broken body to heal. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your anger over an injustice is invalid. It is a tool, a powerful one. But it's not a place to live. It's the rocket fuel that gets you off the ground. But it is not the air you are meant to breathe. Use it to launch yourself to escape the gravity of your pain, and then let it go and find the quiet, steady strength that allows you to fly on your own. I learned that we are all architects of our own lives, and sometimes the bravest thing we can ever do is to condemn the faulty structure we were handed and build a new one from the foundation up that is worthy of housing our own soul. Because I believe that your life's true architecture is not the structure you are placed in, but the one you have the courage to build from the ruins. My story is just one blueprint. I'm sure many of you have your own. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you, who is the chosen family that showed up for you? Was there ever a difficult truth in your own life that once you faced it, ultimately set you free? This story is about finding strength in unexpected places. What has been your most unexpected source of strength? I'd love to read your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the architecture of your own life, consider this channel a quiet place to find more stories that understand the weight and the beauty of the human heart. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter we share together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this healing journey.